The greatest stone circle in the world, Stonehenge, challenges all who see it to solve its riddles. Over 5,000 years, it has been many things to many people.
Thee we invoke, O light of light.
In the past few years, revolutionary new technologies have provided answers thought lost in the depths of prehistory.
This is the best time to solve the mysteries of Stonehenge.
From discoveries about the people who built it and the monuments that inspired them.
The really amazing thing is the kind of Steven Spielberg kind of moment.
To what it was for.
The fact that it so tightly captures the alignments makes Stonehenge the peak of prehistoric architecture.
The motive behind its construction.
I think that the society that built Stonehenge did it in reaction to an existential threat.
And the latest extraordinary revelations about where its most sacred stone came from.
The new discovery about the altar stone is truly thrilling. If it's correct, then that is just mind-blowing.
Today, we know more about Stonehenge than any time since it was built. But with every answer, another mystery lies waiting.
You keep thinking that Stonehenge has been solved, and then you go and take some more data, and bang.
Stonehenge is one of the world's greatest prehistoric monuments. It stands on Salisbury Plain in Wiltshire, England. Archaeologists believe it was constructed in several phases 5,000 years ago, from around 3000 BC to 1500 BC. But so much of it remains a mystery. How was it created? Who built it? And what was it used for?
I think it was aliens. Sorry, that's what I think. I do. That's what I think. Nobody knows, right? So, I mean, they know, but nobody really knows.
What freaks me out is the slaughter stones, because you sort of can imagine the horrific things that took place there, whether it was, you know, sacrifice of a virgin or not.
My feeling is a feeling of awe and how significant something like that was, and the size, and also what they used it for.
Today, the Stonehenge Monument is managed by English Heritage, who try to help visitors make sense of the puzzling array of stones. And the first lesson is that it's not just stones.
So Stonehenge was built in stages, and you know, Stonehenge, the stone component is actually just one part of it, because it starts with an earthwork feature.
Constructed around 3000 BC, the circular earthwork that surrounds the site is referred to as a henge.
And that would have been gleaming white on the landscape, almost monumental in its own right, because they're digging into chalk.
Forming the monument's outer circle are the iconic sarsen stones.
The tallest one is about 7 meters above the ground. We think there's about a third under the ground. You know, they really are very tall and heavy, but it really is an amazing feat of engineering.
Made of sandstone, sarsens are found all over this part of England. But how did they get some of them 7 meters into the air?
As well as the huge uprights, the lintels, in a way, is one of the great mysteries, how they actually got the lintels on the top. It is one of the things I get asked most by visitors, how did they get the lintels up there?
Inside the circle, there are 43 smaller bluestones, thought to have been transported an incredible 300 kilometers to the site. They surround the most distinctive stone structures of all, the trilithons.
Trilithon literally just means 3 stones in Greek. And it's the 2 uprights with the 1 lintel on the top. And that's the classic symbol of Stonehenge, if you like, the trilithon. And it's sort of iconic all around the world. And we have 5 of those trilithons, and they make a horseshoe shape facing down behind me, which in fact is the alignment of the rising of the midsummer sun.
Yet, one mystery that no one can answer for certain is why choose this site in the first place? The answer is thought to be found almost 10,000 years ago, to a time when hunter-gatherers had come to Britain after the end of the Ice Age. With trees blanketing most of the country, Salisbury Plain was a rare open space grazed by large animals. Ideal for hunting, it also had a surprising advantage: the wide open night sky.
The bright moon, we still have the expression now, hunter's moon. The moon would have aided the hunt. And so I think what we have to imagine is 8,000 years ago, people are out here laying in wait for big animals who may be slightly off guard because of it being nighttime. And people would have been very, very observant of the moon, the passage of the moon, and working out what advantages it would have given them.
By around 8000 BC, over 5,000 years before Stonehenge began, these bands of migrating hunter-gatherers made camp at a local spring. Today, it's called Blick Mead. It's a place of buried treasure and ancient secrets.
In some ways, this place is the genesis to the whole of the Stonehenge landscape happening in the future. It starts with really practical things. Here you have accessible water all year long, right from the beginning. That drew in animals. People followed the animals. Little bit by little bit, stories and myths and histories become attached to this place. So what we're seeing here is potentially a cradle for where all of that later comes from.
First excavated only in 2005, archaeological work at Blick Mead has yielded some astonishing finds. Beautiful flint tools, up to 8,000 years old, and the remains of exotic foodstuffs we certainly don't eat today.
We found some beaver teeth. Beavers are great for people who need fat. A beaver tail alone is 70% fat. That would have been a massive protein source for people.
The site also contained bones that were on a whole different scale. The remains of a giant prehistoric monster called an aurochs.
I've got two pieces of aurochs here. First one is a tooth. There are a lot of teeth in the platform. This one would have been part of a ferocious animal. It's actually only part of its tooth as well. This is also from an aurochs, and it's from a piece of vertebrae right at the top of the neck. So if you can imagine, touch the base of your neck at home and feel how small that vertebrae piece is. This is a whopper, and it's from a very large animal, probably from a bull.
Hunting by the light of a full moon, gangs of hunters would have needed all their wits to bring an aurochs down. Racing at speeds of over 50 kilometers an hour and weighing over a ton, a full-grown bull was a formidable and lethal beast. But the risks were worth it.
There would have been food for about 300 people as well. So this is something that's a major resource.
It was these hunters that almost certainly created the first monument on the site of Stonehenge. Almost lost to time, the discovery was made in the aftermath of a major restoration project.
So the last major excavations that were done were in the 60s, and at that time then they decided to build a car park because more people were coming to visit Stonehenge. And interestingly, they discovered a series of pits which were from the Mesolithic. And some of these pits contain pine wood, and they date back to about 7,500 years BC, so over 9,000 years ago.
These pits house the bases of large poles.
We know that they're probably something like the height of a telegraph pole. They could have had art on them. I think that's probably very likely, so they could have been like totem poles.
What purpose did these poles serve? One answer is hunting.
The area around the Stonehenge Knoll, in effect, at the beginning, we think was a kill zone. If you were standing where I am now in the hunter-gatherer period, you would have seen those animals like dots moving across, and you would have seen those posts. So those are important time markers there for hunters to anticipate the right time to move in for the kill.
It's not the only possibility. These poles might have served a different function.
In the late 1960s, the suggestion was also made that these Mesolithic posts might have had an astronomical function, because from the perspective of Stonehenge and certain spots around Stonehenge, looking in the direction of those posts, they might mark significant sunsets or moonsets.
It was more than 5,000 years after the first timber posts were put up on the site of Stonehenge that the Great Stone Circle was built. One question has mystified people for centuries. Who built Stonehenge?
Stonehenge was built by people who were early farmers, and it's 1,000 years after the arrival of farming in Britain. So that's the period that we call the Neolithic, the New Stone Age. Before that, Britain was inhabited by hunter-gatherers, and they we call the Mesolithic, or the Middle Stone Age.
Around 3 kilometers away from Stonehenge is an ancient site called Durrington Walls. It's named after a large circular earthwork half a kilometer wide. And it's here that archaeologists made one of the greatest Neolithic finds of the 21st century.
Underneath the grass that I'm standing on was the biggest discovery that we were to make at Durrington Walls. The remains of probably hundreds of houses and the rubbish heaps that they'd accumulated while they were living here.
Home to 4,000 people, it would have been the biggest Neolithic settlement in the UK, a prehistoric metropolis.
What was really exciting for the Stonehenge story was this was about the people themselves. This is where they lived, no doubt while they were building Stonehenge, just a couple of miles away. So they were gathering from all over Britain, many different parts, and they brought their animals with them, they brought all their supplies. They came here maybe for a decade to build Stonehenge, and then they left.
How they did it remains a matter of debate. Over the ages, there have been innumerable theories, some more magical than methodical. And in the Middle Ages, people believed none other than Merlin was involved.
Our first written work around it is Geoffrey de Monmouth, and he wrote a mythical history of Britain, and that was the early 12th century, and he connected it to Merlin, so the myth of King Arthur and this magician. And he said that originally the monument was built in Africa.
Carried to Ireland by a race of African giants, the stones are hauled to the top of the mythical Mount Killorus, where they are set down and named the Giants' Dance.
In Arthurian legend, there's a story about this place called Mount Killorus in Ireland, where there was this amazing henge that was full of these very sacred stones that were full of healing properties, very magical stones.
Meanwhile, in England, a great battle had been raging between the Britons and the treacherous Saxon invaders. But eventually, the Britons win out, and Uther Pendragon, father of King Arthur, seeks to commemorate their hard-won victory.
As a result, there was a desire to create a monument to those fallen. and people cast around for ideas, and eventually, stories vary, but Uther Pendragon is told, well, if you want something, you should go and seek out Merlin, and he'll tell you. Merlin is approached, and Merlin says, go to Ireland and fetch the giant's dance and bring it up and set it up as the monument to this battle to the fallen. It's a fitting memorial.
So 15,000 men went across the water, and they actually had a big fight with the Irish king over there, a big battle, and they won. And they actually took the stones and brought them over the water, over the land, and built Stonehenge. And that's one of the Arthurian stories that include Merlin as part of the kind of pioneering force of this group that actually created this ancient monument that we have in England right now.
Because Stonehenge is on the face of it inexplicable, people attribute otherworldly means for its construction and use. So there starts being giants, then it's magicians, then it's Romans because they're sophisticated, and it's the Greeks. And each society starts inventing a new myth. So by the 1960s, we get it's a computer, and then by the 1970s, we get it's built by aliens.
Modern archaeologists think building Stonehenge was a question of manpower and ingenuity, rather than magic or alien technology. But the enduring mysteries around this extraordinary place attract over 1 million visitors every year. For some, it's a place of sacred pilgrimage. It's just before 5:30 a.m. on March 20th, and the last revelers of the night and the morning's first early risers are getting ready.
Hail and welcome! Hail and welcome!
Every year at the same time, several hundred people gather here from all walks of life.
May there be peace throughout the whole world.
Druids, pagans, and free spirits. They're here to take part in a sacred ritual.
Thee we invoke, O light of light.
Be thou a bright flame before us.
Today is the spring equinox, a sacred time of the year in the pagan calendar, when day and night are equal and life is in balance. The atmosphere is warm and friendly. Everyone has their own special reasons for being here.
And I am the Crow Queen, yeah. I've gone for the, like Morrigan 5, the goddess of crows. I rescue crows.
Coming here today, I just wanted to immerse myself in that spirit and that unity and that dancing and that vibe and the drum where the heart connects to the earth, and to see the people with bare foot and get involved in that.
Stonehenge to me is an ancient place where there's healing. You can come here and you can just feel the energy, and the energy goes out north, south, east and west. And there's something about coming together and being a unity as one.
I feel connected to every being around, not just human beings. Like, I'm connected to the soil and the earth and the mycelium and the fungus and all the lichens that are on the rocks and all the fungus that interconnect all of us.
Some of the first historical references to the Druids were made by Roman invader Julius Caesar, several thousands of years after Stonehenge's creation. Writing in the 1st century AD, Caesar describes the Druids as a secretive elite who shun the written word and indulge in human sacrifice. But there is no historical evidence that Druids existed at the time Stonehenge was built. Even if they weren't responsible for its creation, Druids still believe Stonehenge's purpose is as a place of worship. Druidic celebrations have continued here since the turn of the 20th century.
Now, of course, there have been times when, unfortunately, Druidry was prescribed and it was not wise to call yourself that, nor is it. But then every so often it comes alive again. And I think it's definitely a continuation of that lineage in respect that people come here and, they're taking part in a process that people have been doing for thousands and thousands of years. And this seems to be a particularly good period for rekindling of that primal essence, if you like.
When Stonehenge was constructed in 2500 BC, it was more than 5,000 years after the hunter-gatherers of Blick Mead, who first left their mark here. But the farmers who added the great stone circle retained a fascination for the skies above, particularly the sun.
There's lots of things about Stonehenge that we don't know. Some of the things that we do know are about the sun, and these things are facts, that the stones are aligned with the midsummer sunrise, the midwinter sunset, and those two key points of the year are ones that we know were important to them.
Today, the summer solstice regularly attracts 10,000 or more people to witness the sunrise on the longest day of the year.
People regard it as almost a life's mission to get there to see this. Some people like me go there for research purposes or just to look at it because it's a magnificent achievement. Other people go there for ritual purposes. Some people go there because it's a big old party at the solstice, yeah, which is great.
Is almost like a circle of life. It has this connection with our relationship with the sun, our relationship with the passing of time. And Stonehenge is reflecting that relationship between the sun, the years that pass, and ultimately building out of stone, it lasts pretty much forever, unlike us.
The archaeologists have sometimes wrongly said, oh, well, the solstices, it's all about the agricultural year. No, it's not. You don't plant and harvest at those particular times of midwinter and midsummer. What is important is, of course, these are the times of greatest and least light from the sun.
What actually happens on the summer solstice? How does the sun interact with the monument? The first of the stones to be touched by the rays of the midsummer sun stands more than 75 meters from the center of the circle and seems to act like an entrance marker to the site.
And behind me is a single stone known as the heel stone, which marks the rising of the midsummer sun. So the sun comes up the side of the heel stone and shines right through into the center of the stone circle.
The path of the rising sun next strikes the slaughter stone, so named by over-imaginative early archaeologists.
Some of them thought it might have been a druid's altar for sacrifices, but it wasn't. We're pretty sure it stood upright and it had a partner stone here. But it's called the slaughter stone because the iron pan in the rock makes the puddles look red.
Passing into the entranceway, the sun's rays then enter the central horseshoe where the remains of the famous trilithons stand. It's an epic sight. Although most people don't notice, subtle movements of the earth over time mean the rising sun and the stones don't quite align anymore. Fabio Silva is what's called a skyscape archaeologist. He combines astronomy with archaeology to try and peer back through time.
The importance of the sky for the prehistoric people who built Stonehenge is hugely underappreciated right now, in huge part because of people are disconnected from the sky. And we need to realize that in the past things were very different. People in prehistory wouldn't have needed mathematics to do these things. They just needed to live and look up at the sky and use very simple technology to achieve the wonderful feats of engineering that they've clearly achieved.
So what did the Stonehenge summer solstice look like 4,500 years ago? Thanks to 21st century digital techniques, it's possible to witness it once more.
What we're doing now is the sort of thing that we do in skyscape archaeology. We've been to Stonehenge, we took panoramic photographs, and then with the benefit of astronomical software, we can reconstruct the skies in the past. So what we're doing is we're going back in time. So now we are in the center of Stonehenge, looking out towards the Hillstone on Midsummer's Day around 2500 BC in order to experience the midsummer sunrise, which is going to appear and be framed by this window. It's going to appear on the left and climb across the sky, being perfectly framed by the whole window and continuing on its journey.
Stonehenge's accuracy in capturing the alignments of the sun is an incredible feat of engineering. But where did the idea of building stone circles to connect with the skies and the ancestors begin? Using stone to mark special places and burials goes back over 1,000 years before Stonehenge was built. But the first direct connection to a monument that may have inspired Stonehenge is to be found over 400 kilometers away in the Boyne Valley of Ireland. Here lies the spectacular tomb of Newgrange.
Newgrange is a mega monument. It's a gigantic passage tomb with a huge cairn that is 80 meters across. That's 279 feet across. And it will have involved thousands of people bringing tons and tons of material to it. They were importing heavy stones from far and wide to make the most magnificent monument to honor their dead.
Constructed 6 centuries before Stonehenge, the tomb is spectacular. Beautifully decorated with meticulously crafted stonework and distinct spiral carvings. Every winter solstice, something incredible happens.
The really amazing thing about Newgrange, for me, is that there's this unique structure, a light box or a roof box, which has its own separate passageway into the burial chamber at the centre of the mound, and in a kind of Steven Spielberg kind of moment during the winter solstice period for a relatively short few minutes. When the winter sun rises, it then shines through, it creates this huge, beautiful light, and everything is illuminated in the centre. It's absolutely marvellous.
It's thought the tomb was built for the local rulers, who claimed to be god kings.
If you imagine them justifying their power, they could say, yes, we are the elite because we are able to control the movement of the sun. We can make the sun shine into our passage tomb and light up, reinvigorate the spirits of our ancestors.
This perceived power over the sun would become a central feature of Stonehenge.
Even though 600 years odd separate Newgrange and the midwinter solstice celebrations there from the midwinter solstice celebrations at Stonehenge when they built the Sarsen monument there, nevertheless, they're doing the same thing. They are marking the shortest day of the year in a very theatrical way. There's this really deep, redolent echo.
The final part of the puzzle that explains the possible influences behind Stonehenge is to be found in the far north. on a group of islands shrouded in myth and mystery. Orkney, off the northern coast of Scotland. Today, the Orkney Islands are often regarded as remote and its landscape inhospitable. But 700 years before Stonehenge, cattle herding had made the island a center of culture and influence.
By 3200 BC in Orkney, there certainly was an elite. Their way of life, their farming way of life, gave them enough surplus to be able to get large numbers of people to build monuments.
Around that time, they built what's now the best preserved stone settlement in Europe, Skara Brae. First uncovered by a storm in 1850, archaeologists were amazed that everything from the walls to beds and what seemed to be dressers were made of stone. But there was a good reason for that.
Why they started building in stone was probably because there were so few trees on Orkney.
Wood was a precious resource, and much of it was reserved for making boats. Simple timber boats that enabled the elite to travel.
Some ambitious members of these kind of prosperous cowboys, I like to think of them, were able to find out that something very special was happening in Ireland.
Undertaking the perilous voyage to New Grange in a small boat without a sail was no small feat. But for the prestige-hungry rulers of Orkney, the rewards were great.
The Boyne Valley was a centre for pilgrimage. People came from far and wide to witness the midwinter solstice celebrations that happened there. And so these ambitious guys from Orkney, they wanted a little bit of that action as well. So they decided to recreate Newgrange by building a passage tomb at Maes Howe. And in particular, what they brought back was the idea of building a passage tomb that would be orientated on the midwinter solstice.
Maes Howe in Orkney was finished around 3000 BC. But it's what these prosperous cowboys also built about this time that would change the megalithic landscape. The stones of Stonehenge. Only a few ancient blocks now remain, but this circle and the surrounding henge were built 400 years before Stonehenge. And crucially, like the tombs at Newgrange and Maes Howe, the stones of Stonehenge appear to be aligned with the solstices.
There has been a lot of debate about where stone circles originated in Britain and indeed Ireland as well. And it can be quite a heated debate at some times. But certainly as far as the north of Britain was concerned, the stones of Stonehenge were the inspiration for stone circles elsewhere.
Over the next few centuries, hundreds more stone circles and henges would spread out from Orkney.
There are lots and lots of stone circles around Britain. There's more than 1,000 of them. And Stonehenge is almost the very last one that's ever made.
This circle was undoubtedly the greatest. Stonehenge stands over 700 kilometers from Orkney and over 400 from Newgrange, but archaeologists have found plenty of evidence of their influence here.
The similarity in the pottery styles, the similarity in the house constructions, the fact that probably the earliest of the classic henges seems to have started in Orkney first.
Replicas of some of the finds are on display in the reconstructed houses at the Stonehenge Visitor Centre.
So we've recreated a lot of that material here in this space to show kind of day-to-day how people would have gone about living. And you can see here some of the beautiful pots that have these lovely geometric designs that, you know, there's an artistic language that starts in places like Newgrange and Orkney and goes all the way to Stonehenge. They're really kind of stylish, you could say. Like nowadays, we'd happily have a pot like this, right?
At the archaeological site of Durrington Walls, where the people who built Stonehenge lived, There are further clues to the ancient celebrations that were taking place at the solstices. Clues that involved mass slaughter.
I think we can say from the age patterns of the teeth of the animals that actually the vast majority of them were being killed in the autumn and winter months. So either side really of the midwinter solstice.
Excavations suggest as many as 1,000 animals, especially pigs, were slaughtered for annual midwinter feasting. And many of them were delicacies.
The wonderful work that's been done have shown that the pigs were given special diet. So maybe they gave them plenty of apples, so they actually had dental decay because their diet was so sweet. They were making their pigs even more delicious when they then ate them at their feasts.
The feasts at Durrington Walls were attended by thousands of people from hundreds of kilometers in every direction, maybe even as far as Orkney.
We can work out from the strontium isotopes of the animals they were eating, the pigs and the cattle, that these were being brought great distances from many different parts of Britain.
This is something that we can see again and again, and it's a motif, if you like, that links these communities over many, many generations and over hundreds of kilometers. It's a kind of uniting thing in our big narrative, in our story.
Unlike today, when Stonehenge is renowned for its celebrations of the summer solstice, in 2500 BC, people visited the circle around the winter solstice, often before or after huge feasts held at nearby Durrington Walls.
Now, what happens at winter in the sky? The sun is dying. The sun is at its lowest. The days are shortest, the temperatures are very low, and it's pretty miserable. But what happens after midwinter? The sun comes back to life. The days start to get longer, eventually it gets warmer, nature springs back to life. So what we have is the notion of death and afterlife. Now, like the dying sun comes back to life, maybe the dead were also seen as, or meant to, come back to life in some form of afterlife.
Whatever rituals occurred during these festivals will never truly be known. But thanks to painstaking archaeology, we can solve some of the mysteries of how this monument was built. At the Stonehenge Visitors Centre, a scale model helps reveal these secrets.
What's really interesting is there's layers of history in this landscape, and it's a place that people are coming back to for actually thousands of years. And the earliest version actually goes back about 5,000 years ago, and you can see we get the outer bank and ditch, which still exists on site today, but you can see here there's no big stones in the middle. We just have these 56 holes that were used for cremation burials. So when we talk about Stonehenge, what was it for? You know, what is Stonehenge for? We know that actually it was a cemetery. About 500 years after the original sort of earthwork or ditch and bank was built, we get the big stones coming to site. So finally, we get Stonehenge kind of as we know it today. You get the massive Saracen stones. Now, these stones come from the West Woods, which is about 20 miles away. It's a type of hard sandstone. And they're creating this engineered monument at the center of this pre-existing ring and ditch. So it's kind of like they're coming back. They know that this is a place that was really important to their ancestors, a place where they had cremation burials, it was a cemetery, and they're almost like bigging it up, you know? They're really going for it.
The question is continually asked. Who brought these stones to Salisbury Plains? How did they get here? Archaeologists think constructing the site was achieved by incredible human effort.
What Durrington Walls settlement has given us is an idea about the organisational practices, how you get 4,000 people mobilised to put up that extraordinary monument at Stonehenge. One of my researchers has sat down and worked out the kinds of effort involved, and his conclusion is that we're looking at about 3.5 million person hours. It's a huge amount of effort, an enormous work, and one of the most important kind of building projects that we know of in the whole of the ancient world.
The huge feat of moving even the smaller 2 to 5 ton bluestones without modern technology seems impossible. But a new theory explains how this could have been done.
From experiments that we've done, if the grass is dry and long in the summer, as soon as you've got it moving and that grass bends over, the sledge slips really easily along it. And once you've got it going, it's off. Walking pace, no problem.
The other aspect is it doesn't just have to be people pulling the stones. We know that by this point in time, people in the Neolithic were using cattle for traction. So you could actually have teams of cattle pulling the stones when it all got a bit boring and was no longer quite as much fun as it was when they started.
What is even more astounding is how people moved the larger sarsen stones from 25 kilometers away. It's thought as many as 200 were needed, but they may have had some help.
The heaviest ones are over 20 tons. These people didn't have metal technology, but they would have had rope technology. They had timber, and it was always thought that they might have been brought on rollers. But there've been many experiments done, experimental archaeology exercises of trying to drag the stones along the ground, and we're wondering now whether they might have laid trackways.
Stone Age farmers may have had innovative solutions, but there's no evidence they had cranes. How did they lift 20-ton blocks 7 meters into the air?
We don't think they could have wedged them up. There are about 30 of them, and they weigh over 20 tons, 25 some of them. It's still a bit of a mystery, but from experimental archaeology, I think that we've decided that they probably built up ramps and then pushed the lintels into place.
Another mystery that leaves many baffled is how all the stone blocks were then joined together.
They didn't use mortar of any sort. So what we've got is on the top of the huge uprights, there are what we would call tenon joints in carpentry, but they're just sort of like knobs on the top. And then the lintels have got corresponding gaps or holes. So the lintels are fixed onto the huge uprights. And then the amazing thing is that the lintels are all sort of toggled together as well, like early Lego or something, but it all fits together.
Almost every stone was meticulously worked to create a truly breathtaking monument.
Right now, when you go to Stonehenge, everything looks a bit gray. But the monument, when it was built, it would have been like pretty blingy, in your face, like spectacular. Because first of all, this outer ditch, we have an underlying chalk geology. So it would have been white against the green of the landscape. But then also the Saracens, when you first cut them and work them, they're actually bright white and sparkly. And actually the front, the place where people would have been entering the monument, is the most finely worked. And then the blue stones, some of them have these crystal inclusions, so they also would have looked bright blue and sparkly. So it would have been an incredibly impressive monument. It would have been something that no one would have seen at this time. So it would have blown people's minds.
It took over 5,000 years for Stonehenge to evolve from a totem pole to a brilliant white circle of stone. That's more time than separates us from its Neolithic builders. Many more mysteries remain, but some questions are as timeless as the stones themselves.
If I just had a time machine, if I could just go back, I'd just find out who was making them do it in the first place. Was it devotion to some king? Was it just pure science? They just wanted to prove that they understood this.
It is the perfect example of what can be achieved with a group of people with a common purpose working together to make an indelible mark on the planet Earth. And that absolutely fascinates me.
I think we're looking at joining and bringing together people, earth and landscape and rocks and heaven all into a single unified symbol.
Over the many millennia of its existence, Stonehenge has been many things to many different people. Thousands of years ago, the mysterious plains saw hunting battles with giant beasts. And in the 20th century, the stones inspired equally dramatic events, particularly in the 1970s.
So Stonehenge Free Festival is like no other festival you've been to before. The idea, the premise is that everything is free. So if I was to bring some beer, we would hope someone else would bring some bread, and then we would trade. It was effectively this idea of we all live together, we have a great time. It starts with this wonderful innocence and the music that surrounds it and the whole culture. It's fascinating.
At the naive age of 19, I came out from London, where I was at university, to go to the Stonehenge Free Festival. I had no idea what to expect, and what I experienced was a really peaceful, gentle atmosphere where people were just helping each other. And the motto, I think, of the festival was, bring what you expect to find.
But as the number of festival goers multiplied, so did the problems.
It's said that in 1984, 100,000 people were camped in the field surrounding Stonehenge for up to a month. Vast amounts of vehicles, big tops, pyramid stages. It becomes a behemoth. It's almost uncontrollable.
What had started as a joyful and anarchic celebration was rapidly morphing into something altogether more dangerous.
Things get really, really ugly at the Free Festival. It's very, very sad. There's drug dealers from different areas. There's people who die in tent fires. There's petrol bombs being thrown about. There's stabbings, there's muggings. There's all these awful things that are happening. And the darker side of this lawless event was really beginning to rear its head.
As tensions started to build, the stage was set for one of the largest peacetime confrontations in modern British history. The next year, a convoy labelled as New Age travellers headed to Stonehenge, determined to set up the Free Festival.
I was an accident ambulance man in London for 6 years and thought that with that training that I had something to offer this community.
The travellers' alternative lifestyle, a nomadic existence, was making them enemies, and a series of roadblocks stood in their way.
Certain newspapers refer to us as New Age travellers, hippies, and general wastes on the public purse.
11 kilometres from the stone circle, the long convoy of vehicles drew to an abrupt halt.
When I got out of the vehicle, suddenly I heard screams and glass breaking, and I looked up and see a squadron of policemen running down breaking windscreens with their truncheons. People behind me, myself and my family, decided to get in the vehicle and take a sharp right into the field to try and escape this violence.
The 600 travellers had been intercepted by twice that number of police. What happened in the nearby beanfield they broke into has become infamous.
So this is the site of the back of the beanfield, which took place on the 1st of June 1985. I was at home with my father. I was a schoolboy. I was in my first year studying A-levels. And the first we knew of this event was when a helicopter flew over.
I'd explained of my ambulance work, and that was one of the first things that I was doing. First aid to very many people as a result of this first altercation.
As vehicles parked up in the field, police gave the travellers an ultimatum to leave.
There's a massive standoff, this quiet, this moment of nothing happening, and then it turns so nasty. It becomes quite literally one of the largest mass arrests in modern British history.
There was much driving around in circles, zigzags, trying to avoid police. Some vehicles were set on fire. And they went from this lower field into the bean field because everybody had seen what was already occurring.
It was a bit of a shock to us. Of course, there's a slight feeling amongst us, I don't want to take sides on this. We're caught in the crossfire.
I saw many people getting injured. There wasn't anybody that escaped the field.
There were dozens of injuries across both sides. 537 travellers were arrested, though all charges were eventually dropped.
These people were arrested and attacked to teach them a lesson. And if only people had personal experience of people, they would find them to be proper citizens and not the folk devils that they were described as in the British press.
I think that both sides are partially to blame for what had happened. I think the police are always under a great deal of pressure, and they're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't.
Some travellers eventually won compensation for what happened that day. But the Stonehenge Free Festival had come to a chaotic and violent end.
The Battle of Beanfield represents one of the darkest episodes in British history. It's an awful episode. It's a moment we should all really know about and perhaps be a bit ashamed. It's not a good story with a happy ending.
After what happened at the Beanfield, Stonehenge was ruled off limits to everybody on the solstice.
I like a number of bikers were attracted to the pre-festival. We'd meet up at Stonehenge and we'd all bring our stories from around the country, much like the ancients would have done coming here to Stonehenge in Neolithic times. And it was great. And then all of a sudden, they got it into their minds to stop it and outlaw it. And that's when I took up the challenge.
In 1986, this spiritual call to arms would transform a former soldier turned biker into Britain's most famous mythical monarch, King Arthur. The legendary once and future king had returned.
I changed my name to Arthur Uther Pendragon in 1986, and it was the 11th of June 1986. The 11th of June the following year was a full moon. I went to Glastonbury Tor, said a prayer to the goddess and asked that I'd be reunited with the sword Excalibur by the next full moon. By the next full moon, I had a sword, it's called Excalibur, and I became King Arthur.
Today, Arthur is a senior Druid pagan priest and the chief of the loyal Arthurian warband of Druids. But in 1986, Arthur would become Britain's chief trespasser, beginning a long and some would say illustrious quest to allow open access to Stonehenge once more.
For 11 years, I kept getting arrested because they had an exclusion zone in and around Stonehenge that said you couldn't get within 5 miles of Stonehenge over a 3-day period. Well, you know, that's like running you out of town. They couldn't do that. That wasn't legal. And I took that to the European Court.
Taking his crusade to Strasbourg, the once and future king was now joined by a future British Prime Minister.
The young barrister who assisted me in taking it to the European Court was named Keir Starmer when he was a young civil rights attorney. Mark, O Spirit, and hear us now. Confirm.
As a result of the court case, the authorities stopped trying to keep people out of Stonehenge during solstices and equinoxes.
We got back in 99, and we're still getting in now. So I felt vindicated. The only time I feel that I'm in the right place at the right time is when I'm in centre circle, celebrating a solstice or an equinox. And that's when I know I'm at peace with the world.
The mysterious monument of Stonehenge has always proved an inspiration to those captivated by its power. It even cast its spell on one of England's most famous sons, proven by the 17th century graffiti that is still visible after more than 300 years if you know where to look.
We have one very famous piece of graffiti in particular, someone that probably should have known better, but anyway, he's just here behind us. There's a cross on here for Christopher and W-R-E-N. So this is the great architect, Sir Christopher Wren.
So impressed was Wren, it may have even provided inspiration for his greatest work.
Christopher Wren wanted to mimic the dimensions of Stonehenge itself. So if you look at the dome of St Paul's, you'll see the dimensions of the same as Stonehenge. So even monuments like St Paul's Cathedral, right in the centre of London, has got this direct link.
As well as copying the diameter of Stonehenge, Wren also lined his famous dome with columns that resembled a circle of stones, creating what he believed was a form of sacred geometry. But Wren wasn't the only English gentleman to spend time marveling at the stones. Another visitor, desperate to uncover their secrets, inspired a religious movement that's still with us today.
By the time we get to the mid-18th century, William Stukely, who's originally a doctor, latterly an Anglican priest, he's got a fascination for ancient landscapes. And he draws all these things in such a way that we can rely on them, and he's excellent. He then gets completely bitten by the bug of the ancients, working on an idea that it's a Druid temple, and he truly embraces it. And he writes a book, and that's what really fires the idea of Druids and Stonehenge in the public imagination that we're living with right to this day.
William Stukely was also a pioneer in archaeology.
He's the first person who understands and explains that it's aligned to the summer solstice sunrise. He's the first person to notice the ceremonial avenue. He's the first person to notice this mysterious monument called the Cursus, which is 1,000 years earlier than the big stone phase at Stonehenge, and runs roughly east-west, north of Stonehenge in the landscape.
The Cursus was created around 3,500 BC, 1,000 years before Stonehenge as we know it, and long before the many burial mounds that now dot this sacred landscape. Yet, despite several centuries of investigation, it remains one of the enduring mysteries in the Stonehenge landscape.
So the Cursus is quite an enigmatic monument in some ways. It's about 3 kilometres long. It's 2 banks and ditch, more or less parallel. The gap between them being about 100 metres. So it's like a really, really long rectangle.
They went to the effort of digging the soil down to the bedrock, which in this part of Britain is chalk. And if that was left exposed, as we believe it may have been, you can imagine a stretch of land glistening white that was completely stripped to this chalk bedrock.
According to some UFO enthusiasts, this long, thin rectangle must have an extraterrestrial connection.
People have suggested that the Cursus is an alien landing strip.
Visitors to solstices and equinoxes frequently report strange lights in the sky.
There's a weird coincidence about where Stonehenge is, and that's about 4 miles from Boscombe Down Airfield, which is essentially Britain's Area 51. It's where a lot of the experimental aircraft were test flown, and so strange lights in the sky seen in the vicinity of that have been going on for decades. And people have attributed them to aliens when they've been stood right next to me at solstice. Look at the aliens out there. That's military flares, I'm afraid. The idea that you need aliens to build Stonehenge is laughable. Humans can do this. We undervalue them, and we shouldn't.
Most archaeologists think the Cursus was probably for some sort of ceremonial or ritual purpose. But the very latest astronomical research suggests that the curses may have a celestial connection after all.
The white strip of the curses may have represented the Milky Way. And what we have with the Milky Way is we have a stretch of the sky where there's a higher concentration of stars. It is the most obvious thing you see in a dark sky.
The ancient Greeks named it the Milky Way because it resembles a strip of white milk in the heavens.
The curses was exactly the same thing. It's a strip of white chalk on the land. When the curses was built, around 3,500 BC, at certain moments in the year and at certain moments in the night, the Milky Way would be exactly in a position that aligns with the curses. So if you were standing anywhere along the curses, you would see the white strip of chalk going into the horizon and then continuing on into the sky as the Milky Way.
But what significance might this have had for the ancestors of the people who built Stonehenge?
Some Native American groups recognized the Milky Way as what they called the River of Souls. It's possible that there was a similar conception. It was the pathway the souls of the dead would take as they ascend to the heavens.
The idea of using the stars to connect with the dead is repeated when Stonehenge reaches its height in 2500 BC, except by then it is the rising and setting of our sun. These celestial alignments are far from the only secrets that have long remained locked in the stones. Only in the 21st century has the riddle of where many of the stones came from finally been solved. The blue stones sit within the circle of the much bigger sarsen stones. While the sarsens are local, the blue stones don't match any known rock type for hundreds of kilometers. Richard Bevins is an earth scientist who has been leading the investigation into the blue stone's origin for around a decade and a half.
That doesn't look natural. That looks worked by humans.
But the quest to find the source of the blue stones began at least 140 years ago.
Well, the thing about the blue stones is that in the 1880s, and even slightly earlier perhaps, those early investigators realised that those stones, the blue stones at Stonehenge, didn't come from that area.
By the 1920s, geologists identified the likely source as being the Preseli Mountains of Wales, around 300 kilometers away from Stonehenge. Here, there are numerous outcrops of bluestone rock. But pinpointing the exact source was an almost impossible task. Nevertheless, in 2009, Richard began searching. One of the many sites that caught his eye was the bluestone outcrop at Crag Grosevelin.
Well, this is an enormous slab of rock. And from the orientation of the layering in it, we know that it would have come off the face at 90 degrees to its current position, up against that face. Did it fall off naturally, or was it prized off the face of the outcrop?
Could this be the source of the bluestone at Stonehenge? This was just one of hundreds of sites that Richard had taken samples from. Each needed to be checked in the lab. And with so many to analyze, the ones from Crag Grosevelin almost got overlooked.
I realised that I'd collected here, but never actually processed the samples. I hastily got the samples prepared, and lo and behold, 3 of the stones matched this outcrop here at Crag Grosevelin. Obviously, that discovery was extremely exciting, but at the same time, slightly nerve-wracking, because you could say you're putting your professional career on the line.
Incredibly, the test checked out. The stone samples from Crag Grossevelin were an exact match for bluestones at Stonehenge. And it seemed that humans had worked this rock face.
What we've got here is this very strong joint in the rock. And that is at 90 degrees to this surface running along the face of the outcrop. And it's because of this tendency for the rock to open up along that surface. You could wedge out a pillar. And in fact, maybe one was extracted there.
To prove beyond doubt this was the source, there needed to be evidence there had been a quarry here at the time of Stonehenge. In 2011, Richard was joined by an archaeological team led by Mike Parker Pearson. As soon as they began excavating at Crag Grossevelin, they uncovered evidence of prehistoric use. This was in all likelihood the quarry where Stonehenge's famous bluestones originated.
I think one of the really excellent aspects of the work has been the integration of archaeology with geology, because of course they've enabled us really to test our theory.
It's fascinating to think that this area was worked by Neolithic people. It's quite tingling, particularly if you come here on your own. It's a very ethereal place. It's almost haunting.
A surprising discovery suggested that the ancient people who quarried the bluestones also considered them to be so sacred that removing any more became taboo.
Once they'd finished quarrying, they actually dug a ditch, filled it with large blocks of stones to make it an impassable barrier. So I think they're actually blocking it off. They're saying no more shall be brought from this quarry. All very intriguing.
In a twist that some might consider truly incredible, pinpointing the location of the bluestones in Western Wales prompted archaeologists to reconsider a legendary tale. Geoffrey of Monmouth's story that King Arthur's father stole the stones from Ireland at the behest of Merlin. Might this myth have some basis in fact?
Archaeologists have wondered for over 100 years whether there might be a tiniest grain of truth in Geoffrey of Monmouth's story that Merlin brought the stones from Ireland. Now, of course, Wales isn't Ireland, but what is interesting is that at the time that Geoffrey was writing, that part of Wales, Preseli, Pembrokeshire, was considered to be part of Ireland.
If Geoffrey is writing this down in the 12th century AD, then he's potentially writing down an oral tradition that is perhaps 4,000 years old.
It doesn't mean that the rest of his story is by any means true, whether Merlin brought the stones, whether they were supposed to be healing stones or whatever, but it does fit in.
Without Merlin to transport them using magic, moving up to 80 stones weighing 2 to 5 tons each, around 300 kilometers, might have taken hundreds of people, months, even years. What was the motive driving the people from Wales to move their sacred bluestones all the way to Stonehenge?
It's possible that people migrated out of South Wales, bringing symbols, iconic emblems of who they were. But I think there's something more key, and I think it's about unity. That what Stonehenge was doing more than any other Neolithic monument was building unity from quite distant parts of Britain.
Was this monument a symbol to unify different people, clans, or religious beliefs? Modern Druids believe it might have served as an ancient seat of government.
I think Stonehenge is very important to the fabric of Britain because it would appear to be the first place where large religious and spiritual gatherings were held, and that these also had a specific influence on the tribes and the people of the day.
The Bluestones arrived at Stonehenge long before the circle of giant sarsen stones we are familiar with today. In the visitor center, a series of reconstructions illustrates the major changes that have taken place at Stonehenge, right back to its earliest phase, 5,000 years ago.
Now, archaeologists, of course, are debating about this, but one theory is that the Bluestones might have arrived at this time. And these posts, we think, might have been the Bluestones. And we know also the cremated remains, so the people found in these holes, they might have also come from the West. So people might have been sort of bringing sort of their ancestors really early on to this monument from quite far away. After about 500 years, we get the big stones coming to sight. And they're also taking the Bluestones and they're bringing them inside the circle for the first time. So we still see they integrate elements of the earlier sort of monument into this newly engineered monument. So you get this sense of the Bluestones were maybe the really holy stones.
Sat in the center of the horseshoe is possibly the most sacred stone of all, the altar stone.
Underneath these ones that have fallen on top of it is what we know as the altar stone. It doesn't look that different from all the others, but geologists tell us that the altar stone is a very ancient rock and it's almost like the Earth's crust. So there's been quite a lot of interest in the altar stone lately.
4,500 years ago, the altar stone marked the exact spot the sun sank beneath the horizon during the midwinter sunset. It had long been assumed to be a bluestone from Wales, but in 2021, Richard Bevins and his team investigated it using a device called an XRF.
So this is a portable X-ray fluorescence analyzer. If you look underneath, it can be used out in the field as a gun. And one of the things the students really like about this, it's very similar to like the tricorder in Star Trek, where you arrive on a new planet and within a few seconds you can get an idea of the chemical makeup of the planet. Well, it does exactly that.
So barium is there, Ian?
It is there, yes. 0.11% is about 1,100 ppm.
Using an XRF is like doing a geological DNA test. And the results from the altar stone reveal something surprising.
It's very different from the other bluestones in its size, in its rock type, where it sits within the monument. And so that really drew us to looking in more detail at the altar stone and see what that had to tell us.
Just as one mystery had been solved, another had suddenly appeared.
So the altar stone is really, it's very exciting to work on because it's enigmatic. When did it arrive? Where from? Who, how was it transported to the site? It's always been put into the bluestone mix, but actually, to put it bluntly, it stands out like a sore thumb.
The hunt was on to solve the mystery of the origins of Stonehenge's iconic megaliths that played such a key role in solstice celebrations. The extraordinary findings would turn our understanding of prehistoric Britain upside down. For the people who built Stonehenge around 4,500 years ago, the monument was probably intended more for the midwinter sunset than a midsummer sunrise. But does that mean they celebrated midsummer festivities somewhere else? In 1925, an accidental discovery revealed where that might have been.
It's nearly 100 years ago that a pilot flying overhead saw marks in the crop. Excavation soon followed, and they discovered that the marks had been made by the holes where there had been huge timber posts put up, and that these had formed a great timber circle.
This startling circle of 168 concrete markers represents the timber posts or totem poles that stood here at the time of Stonehenge.
So unfortunately, the timber component doesn't survive in the modern day because the timber would have rotted away. But we think they must have been just as skilled in timber work as they would have been with stones.
Woodhenge is around 3 kilometers from Stonehenge. It was a part of the settlement of Darrington Walls, where the people who added the iconic Saracens to the Great Stone Circle lived. Archaeologists believe it was here, among the living, that the midsummer solstice was celebrated. By contrast, Stonehenge, as an ancient burial site, was a place for midwinter.
That really set up an understanding that stone was perceived as the eternal medium of the ancestors, whereas wood was temporary, reflecting the temporary lives of the people that built Stonehenge. In a way, Stonehenge would have been stuck out on its own, away from the real centre of where everything was going on.
The people who built Stonehenge are thought to have abandoned their traditional solstice celebrations and their settlement at Darrington Walls in the years after the Great Circle was completed. However, new evidence has revealed that before they left, they embarked on one final building project. In 2018, geologists began a series of land surveys at Darrington Walls that were to reveal a whole hidden dimension to this monumental landscape.
To map an area like Stonehenge, we need to think about it not in the way that we look at it with our eyes, but almost as a way that physics can look at it with different senses. And so using geophysics, it's almost like, we've got some sort of magic glasses that allows us to see in a different way what's under the earth.
Gathering imagery from the air, they made an incredible discovery. There were 20 circular shapes forming what looked like 2 partial halves of a giant ring surrounding the site.
It does not join up to a complete circle. Some of the areas where we'd expect to see the features have been built on, have been modified by humans, and we can't see the signature. We can't physically run our measurements where there's a house today or a road's being built. So let me show you some of these geophysical results to start with, and we'll start here from this broad picture of what's going on. So as I tip this landscape model, now we've got the aerial photograph lying on top of the contours of the land, so the up and down humps and bumps of the land. You can see at the centre here, this is the site of Darrington Walls itself, the circular walls, and now I'm going to zoom myself in. And as we're zooming in, you can see a line in colour here, and this is actually a cross-section to the earth. So I'm going to tip this now, and we're going to look, rather than looking as a bird's eye view down on this, we're going to look as a worm crawling through the landscape. What you'll see on here is every time we've got one of these surface features, you can see the colour changing in the section beneath it. The blue represents a electrically conductive centre core to that compared to the chalk. You see a very clear, almost like cut into the earth, and that's exactly what has happened. They have cut into the earth here for this feature.
Each of the 20 pits was roughly 5 meters deep and 10 meters wide. Digging them would have involved excavating around 8,000 cubic meters of earth, equivalent to more than 3 Olympic swimming pools. But who dug them, and when? It was time to take the next step and drill into the ground for samples of the earth deep within.
You know, the geophysics, there's nice colour plots of it, but we need ground truth.
Taking cores is no simple task. They must be packaged and sealed without being exposed to daylight. The result is a cross-section of the different materials in the pits. There are layers of chalk, feldspar, and clay. But one mineral holds the magical key to unlocking the secret of when these pits were dug. Quartz.
Quartz is extremely useful because we can use quartz to tell when sediment or soil was last exposed to daylight.
Tiny samples are removed from the core in special red light, which won't spoil the result. They are then put through a series of filters and washes to remove all the impurities.
So that's our pure quartz.
It's a painstaking job.
It takes up to a week for a set of 10 samples. The next stage is to dispense that quartz to disk.
The samples are put into an optical stimulated luminescence machine, or OSL, which can tell the scientists when the quartz was buried by measuring the last time it was exposed to daylight. It's like capturing a trapped ray of sun from long ago.
And we found that the sediment at the base of the 4 cores we've studied all dates to about 2100 to 2400 BC.
The date suggests the circle of gigantic pits was built by the people who lived at Durrington Walls. Probably not long after they put up the great Sarsen stones at Stonehenge. What the pits were for remains a mystery, but it was their last great construction project. After thousands of years, their way of life was about to come to an end.
I think that the society that built Stonehenge did it in reaction to an existential threat to their belief systems, their society, their way of life. And the existential threat was the arrival of the metal-bearing culture from Europe.
This is the moment that the whole question of unity must have been severely under pressure. So you can imagine that that might have been the very inspiration for building this monument of unity, but just at the moment that it was about to fall apart.
It may have been in response to this looming crisis that the builders of Stonehenge crowned their moment with perhaps its most mysterious addition: the altar stone. Using cutting-edge technology, the geologist had produced a distinctive chemical signature of its rock type and were searching for a match, starting with where they found bluestones in Wales.
After nearly 60 samples collected, we had just completely drawn a blank. So that made us realise that maybe we're not looking in the right place. And our conclusion was that now is time to broaden our horizons.
They identified target areas in the UK, and working with an international team in 2024, they struck geological gold.
We've got some preliminary results which look very exciting, which could have serious implications.
The mineral ages of the altar stone matched ancient rocks found in the upper reaches of Britain. This places it over 700 kilometers away, in a region that includes the remote islands of Orkney.
The new discovery about the altar stone is truly thrilling. If it is really the case, as it could well be, that sandstone quarried in Orkney was taken all the way down Britain and then placed in Stonehenge to be in a focal point, then that is just mind-blowing.
And the thing to remember about the altar stone, it's a very elegant and fragile piece. It's over 5 meters long, at least 5 tons in weight. And to bring that any kind of distance without it breaking has to have been a remarkable achievement.
Why move a stone over 700 kilometers from north-east Scotland? The answer may be because the Orkney Islands are where it's thought the first stone circle in prehistoric Britain was built. Centuries earlier, the stones of Stonehenge. Close by is the ring of Brodgar, which may give us a further clue, because it was built around the time of Stonehenge, using stones brought from different communities all over the islands.
Is it a sort of a macro-scale version of what we see at Ring of Brodgar, where people were bringing in stones from several different areas from quite long distances away within Orkney? Well, it could be, but the difference in distance travelled is so enormous that we have to kind of take a deep breath and say, wow.
And you have to wonder what that must have meant. And we have various possibilities. It's a token of triumph, a trophy taking, that if you're actually making alliances, you're actually giving things from one group to another. And this really, for me, confirms the idea that Stonehenge was a monument to the unity of the ancestors of Britain. And that's another big piece of the jigsaw falling into place.
To an outsider, it might appear that in 2500 BC, Stonehenge was at its height. But could it be that Stonehenge, along with Woodhenge, the great pits around Durrington walls, and the arrival of the altar stone from the area around Orkney, were all part of a desperate bid to ward off an invasion? The Stone Age culture that had built these monuments was about to disappear forever.
My guess is that the altar stone was right at the center of the monument at that point. This is its greatest hour. And yet, we know that their world was about to change dramatically, because this is right at the moment of contact with people who are coming from continental Europe.
It was the dawn of the Bronze Age, and the new people brought horses, the wheel, and the secrets of making metal.
Within 400 years of their arrival, 16 generations, less than 10% of the genetic makeup of people of Britain derived from the Neolithic farmers within Britain. So it's a near total population replacement.
But the new arrivals were left awestruck by the splendor and mystery of this circle of stone that continues to fascinate us today. From the timber posts used by hunter-gatherers more than 10,000 years ago, and the curses that may have mapped the stars above, to the circle of sacred bluestones brought from Wales, the great interlocking sarcens that mark the solstices with breathtaking precision, and the altar stone that may have been carried 700 kilometers to form its centerpiece. Stonehenge remains one of the most enigmatic and enduring structures on Earth. We can only guess what other ancient mysteries still remain locked in the stones.